Welcome back everyone to the channel and yet another retro GPU breakdown episode where today we're going to break down the GPU inside the PlayStation 3. But before we begin, if you are new to the channel and enjoy tech breakdown videos such as this, consider subscribing so that way you can check out my weekly uploads. And if you enjoyed this video at all, please make sure to suplex that like button. That way YouTube will actually show this video off to others who may enjoy it as well. As always, I really appreciate you all. Now let's just dive right into the content. When Sony unveiled the PlayStation 3 in 2006, it showed that Sony wasn't just pushing out a new generation gaming console. It was due to deliver a technical marvel designed to push the boundaries of interactive entertainment, especially with its cell CPU. But all the major details there are going to be reserved for its own dedicated video in the future, because that's the type of attention that topic deserves. But you will hear me touch up on the cell CPU in this video, as it's very relevant for the graphics quality we saw throughout the life of the PS3, especially the latter half of it. A fun fact is the PS3 cell was designed to be as powerful as possible, and originally even designed to have no need for a GPU inside the PS3 at all. Initially planning to use the cell CPU's SPUs to do everything, but it just couldn't be done. Thus, Sony partnered with NVIDIA and co-developed the heart of the PlayStation 3's graphics and the star of this show, the RSX Reality Synthesizer. The RSX was based on NVIDIA's then cutting-edge GeForce 7 architecture, specifically the 7800 GTX, making the PS3 a bold and powerful leap in console graphics technology that put it on par with a high-end gaming PC at the time of its release, in a living room gaming box. The overall specs of the PS3 were quite impressive. As I mentioned, it had an extremely powerful CPU when fully utilized, featuring technically 7 processing cores and 8 processing threads, specifically 1 PPE or power processing element that was a single-core, dual-thread power PC chip, as well as 7 SPUs or synergistic processing units. The PowerPC core ran general application and helped control the SPUs, but the SPUs were capable of handling parallel calculations, especially floating point operations, and offloaded a lot of work from the CPU. Again, I'll cover this in more depth in a later video because the CPU on the PlayStation 3 is mighty complex. The PS3 also had 512 megabytes of RAM, 256 of GDDR3 SD RAM dedicated for the GPU, and 256 megabytes of XDR RAM primarily for the CPU, but we'll touch up on this more a little bit later. So far, the PS3 is already looking like an extremely capable 2006 gaming console. But this episode is about the GPU, so let's break that apart and see what made it so capable. The RSX ran at a 500 MHz clock speed and was initially on a 90 nanometer process, which later shrank down to as low as 28 nanometers in 2013. The PS3 had programmable shaders that ran at a different clock speed than the GPU, at 550 MHz to be exact, and was composed of 24 pixel shader ALUs, or arithmetic logic unit pipelines. These pixel shaders acted like mini GPU cores dedicated on running parallel pixel shader code, or basically all the shader code at the same time to work together to push the pixels that end up being displayed on the screen, and was capable of 5 ALU operations per pipeline per cycle, and 27 floating point operations per pipeline per cycle, and 8 vertex shaders that handled all the 3D vertice data such as positioning, color, texture coordinates, and more, and was capable of 2 ALU operations per pipeline per clock cycle, resulting in 16 ALU operations per clock cycle across all vertex shader pipelines. It also had 24 texture filtering units and 8 vertex texture units. The texture filtering units smooth out textures when they get stretched, shrunk, or seen at an angle instead of pixelating when zooming in and out. Vertex texture units let the 8 vertex shaders I mentioned a second ago look up texture data while they're processing their vertices to move and be used based on what the texture actually is, instead of being used for coloring pixels themselves like they used to be, allowing tricks to be used like animating a moving flag in the wind, and can provide up to 24 filtered samples per clock and 32 unfiltered texture samples per clock. Finally, it had 8 render output units, or ROPs, that take final shaded pixel data and gets it ready for display, and is the final step in the rendering process before the image hits the screen. These GPU specs provided the RSX with the capability of 13.2 gigatexels per second for a texel fill rate, 4.4 gigapixels per second for a pixel fill rate, and 239 gigaflops of total floating point operation performance. Now again, these specs and performance metrics don't do the PS3 justice on its own, as the cell CPU really further enhances the PS3's capabilities. But this was still a pretty good GPU to have in the system for the time. And for reference for how powerful the RSX GPU was, the aforementioned 7800 GTX, of which it was designed from, was released by NVIDIA a year before the PlayStation 3 was released in 2005, and was NVIDIA's high-end PC GPU with a $600 MSRP at launch on its own. Why that's crazy for me to think about as I researched for this video is because I can't help but imagine what the same parity would be today. It would be like the PS6 launching this year with 4080-like capabilities, not in 2027 or 2028 whenever they decide to release that, but today, and for a price tag of what the higher end consoles are going for, like the PS5 Pro, at $700 or less like today, which is pretty crazy to think about. And yeah, I know it definitely wouldn't happen, but it just blows my mind that this is the type of parity, and was also the leap we were seeing back in the day from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3, and it really just makes me miss those days, but also helps me realize what hardware enthusiasts were so excited about oh so long ago. Of course, the RSX wasn't an exact replica of the 7800 GTX, even though it derived from it. It did have advantages, and it also had disadvantages. For comparison, the 7800 GTX ran at a 430 MHz clock speed, and even had the same 256 megabytes of GDDR3 dedicated video memory for its 256 megabyte model, but it had a 256-bit memory bus instead of the 128-bit bus found on the RSX's memory configuration, resulting in a large lead over the PS3's GPU in memory bandwidth with up to 38.4 gigabytes per second of bandwidth. Aside from that, most of the rest of the specs from the 7800 GTX are really similar to the PS3's GPU, as it had the same amount of pixel shaders, vertex shaders, texture units. It did have double the overall ROPs at 16 total, but besides that, it was very similar, and overall pretty easy to get an idea of why everyone talks about the PS3 GPU being a modified 7800 GTX in console form. The memory configuration on the PS3 was certainly a little different as well, but it was crucial for the PS3's graphical capabilities. Like I stated at the start of the video, the PS3 had a total of 512 megabytes of RAM, 256 primarily used for the CPU known as XDR RAM, and 256 of GDDR3 SD RAM dedicated to the RSX GPU as video memory, running at 650 MHz with a 124-bit memory bus. This provided 20.8 gigabytes a second of memory bandwidth for the GPU, sufficient without further ballooning of the PS3's initial price tag, while still enabling larger and more expansive games with high-res textures, while still supporting up to 1080p internal resolutions. But this resolution maximum often fell short, with most games running at 720p internally or even lower, as 256 megabytes with almost 21 gigabytes a second of memory bandwidth can only get you so far with what the PS3 was able to render. The RSX could also further access some of the XDR memory if needed, which a lot of people don't know about, but the RSX could theoretically have access up to 224 megabytes of the 256 megabyte XDR allocation, for a total of 480 megabytes of video memory between the mix, with the rest left over for the operating system and CPU. But maxing out this allowance was far from a common practice, if at all ever, as many games of course demanded more RAM from the CPU than just a few dozen megabytes, and the operating system was also said to reserve up to 96 megabytes of RAM at launch, with 64 megabytes from the XDR pool and 32 reserved from the GDDR3 pool to operate correctly. It has been said that operating system refinements have reduced these numbers over time, but I couldn't find reliable or accurate data during my research to find how much this OS allocation has been trimmed down to modern day. Regardless, that meant that 480 megabytes was nowhere near the real-time RAM usage for the GPU at best, but it did have more flexibility with its memory than a lot of people understand, and as the operating system RAM did get trimmed down, more of it was able to be used as needed, which is always great. Overall, all these specs gave the PS3's capability the chance of having some groundbreaking graphics on the system, even at just a fundamental level with its GPU. But the graphics capability for the PS3 did get pushed further, and the whole story is not told with just the RSX GPU. And so here's where we're going to touch up a little bit on the PlayStation 3's cell CPU and the SPUs inside it. You see, these SPUs and the cell CPU could be programmed to help the GPU and the CPU do geometry processing or vertex work like tessellation-like tricks. For more detail on ground surfaces or even animations, physics calculations for things like particle effects, post-processing effects like depth of field or bloom, texture streaming and mesh streaming by managing levels of detail or LOD models, or even decompressing textures in real time, and more, all providing high levels of graphics detail at high performance levels you wouldn't think possible on the system while displaying them. A standout that comes to mind here immediately is Killzone 2, where only 60% of the SPU's true power is being utilized in the PlayStation 3, but it still pushes the console beyond what its GPU could do alone, by doing things like a lot of the math that was used for lighting passes and culling in the game, allowing hundreds of dynamic lights on screen at once, and helped the moody lighting the game had. This even affected things like gunfire lighting, lights on soldiers, and their shadows these effects casted. The SPUs were also used to render the smoke effects, the motion blur, and depth of field used in the game, and even assisted with the animation that NPCs would do when reacting to gunfire whenever they got hit. All these SPUs and additional effects working together with an already capable GPU allowed some games, like Killzone 2, to look like it shouldn't even be capable of running on the system at all. So at the end of the day, the PlayStation 3 was extremely capable and powerful the day it launched, but it was also very expensive for the time because of the technology in it, and it was very hard to optimize for. But when done correctly, properly utilizing the capability of the Cell CPU in tandem with the RSX GPU, the PS3 was able to do unimaginable things on the system that gave us some amazing looking games that hold up well on their own, even today, many years later. But that's all I have for you in today's video. I want to thank you all for watching this far of my basic breakdown of the GPU specs for the PS3. I thought this video would be longer, but the GPU in the system is overall straightforward when it comes to the rest of the system, especially the CPU. It's only when you dig into this Cell CPU and its SPUs, as well as how the Cell and RSX GPU talk to each other, where things get really intriguing. So I am excited to provide that video in the future for you all. I do have quite a backlog from all the requests in the comment section from you all, and I do plan on covering every GPU and every console ever released. So yes, if it's a console and it was ever released, it is on the list, don't worry. But it just takes a lot of time researching, learning, and to be able to articulate everything I learn into digestible content. So I will be taking my time there. Anyway, again, thank you so much for watching. If you have any great memories with the PlayStation 3, please comment below. Also, if you've watched this far and listened to me ramble, my #1 rambling fans, please comment down below that you've stuck around so I can once again, and as always, thank you for being here and listening to me. Anyway, I hope you all have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.